My name is Sabine. I'm 33 years old, and my family knew the exact hour of my surgery. When something went wrong, the hospital called both of my parents. Neither of them came. I woke up alone and found a photo of them smiling at a barbecue in my beach house. The caption said, "Finally, one day that stayed peaceful." 10 days later, Dad told me to bring the deed. What he did not know was that I had already made one phone call. I run shift operations at a distribution center outside Charleston. 400 people, 3 shifts, trucks that do not care what day it is. When something breaks at 2 in the morning, mine is the phone that rings. That was true at work. It was also true at home, and for most of my life I could not tell you where one ended and the other started. Let me give you the short version of who I was, because you need it before any of this makes sense. If my mother's car would not start, she called me. Not the mechanic, me. When my sister Delaney needed a deposit on a rental, I wired it. If something broke or a bill needed handling, I was the person expected to fix it. And every time, I felt something I mistook for love. I felt necessary. In my family, being necessary was the closest thing to being wanted, and I built a whole personality out of it. Then a storm took the roof off their beach house. The surge took the lower level, the electrical system, and most of the roof. My parents were underinsured, the payout covered only a fraction of the damage, and there was still a mortgage on the house. Selling it damaged would not have cleared the loan. My parents were facing the possibility of losing the property and still owing money afterward. So I bought it. I want to be plain about this part, because everything downstream depends on it being clear. This was not an informal family arrangement. There was a legal closing and a lawyer. I paid them just over $45,000 in cash, everything I had saved through years of overtime, and assumed the remaining mortgage in my own name. My parents walked away debt-free, with cash in hand. The deed said my name. Only my name. It has said my name for 4 years. Then I spent the next 4 years putting that house back together. Within the first year, once I had made the upstairs safe and the basic systems reliable, my parents sold their own place and asked if they could move in permanently. I said yes. Of course I said yes. They were getting older, their house was too much for them, and I had a home on the coast that was safe enough to live in even if half the work was still unfinished. I did not ask for rent. Not $1, not one time. I kept paying the mortgage, the insurance, the taxes, and the maintenance while I rebuilt the rest of the house around them, one weekend at a time, and told myself that was what a good daughter did. Not with contractors and a big budget. With weekends. I paid for the roof, the rewiring, the drywall, the floors, and the new pilings under the deck. I did the work I could do myself, which turned out to be more than I expected, because when you cannot afford labor, you learn. There is a photograph of me on a ladder in that house with a respirator on, taken during a week when I had used my vacation days to tear out ruined insulation. My mother took that picture. She thought it was funny. By the 4th year, the house was better than it had been before the storm. I even let them keep the summer. Every summer after they moved in, for about 6 weeks in peak season, that stretch of coast rented for money that did not seem real. My parents would list the house, move in with Delaney for those weeks, and keep every dollar of the rental income to top up their retirement. My house, my mortgage, my insurance, their income. They knew. That is the thing I need you to hold on to. In the beginning, they knew exactly whose house it was. My mother used to tell people her daughter had brought it back. But there is something that happens when you carry a thing for someone long enough without ever asking them for anything. They stop seeing you carrying it. The carrying becomes weather. It becomes the floor. Nobody thanks the floor. Somewhere along the way, in their heads, it went back to being their house. And I never corrected it, because correcting it would have made me the difficult one. And I had spent my whole life being the useful one instead. I kept a spare key on my ring in my own bedroom upstairs, the small one at the back with the window over the dunes. That room had been mine since I was a kid. My things were in it. That was the arrangement, unspoken, and I never thought about it once. Meanwhile, Delaney got married and got pregnant, and the whole family orbit shifted around the first grandchild. I was happy for her. And then my back went. I had been putting off surgery for over a year, but a disc problem had reached the point where I could barely stand through a full shift. I finally scheduled the operation, months in advance. Everybody knew the date. My mother wrote it on her kitchen calendar. In her handwriting, because I stood in that kitchen in the spring and told her, and she picked up the pen herself and put it on the square. If you have ever been the person everybody calls, and never the person anybody checks on, stay with me tonight, because you and I are going to understand each other before this is over. Before we go any further, tell me the city you are watching from and the hour where you are. This is Rose Untold Stories. Let's continue with the story. It was a routine operation. That is what routine means. It is routine right up until it is not. Every single one of them knew the date. They took me into surgery at 9 that morning, and something went wrong in there. I am not going to walk you through it, partly because I do not remember any of it, and partly because nobody needs that. It was a bleed. The operation ran hours longer than it was supposed to, and at some point it got serious enough that the hospital stopped waiting and started working through my emergency contacts. They called my mother, she answered. They told her what was happening. They called my father, he answered too. I woke up sometime in the evening in a room with the light already going orange outside, with my mouth full of cotton and no idea how much time had passed. My throat hurt from the tube. There was a nurse checking a line. There was the sound of a cart somewhere down the hallway, and the flat electronic noise those rooms make, and underneath it nothing. And there was nobody else. My parents had been told exactly what was happening. Delaney knew the surgery date and was 40 minutes away with them. And I opened my eyes in a hospital room with nobody there who shared my last name. The nurse asked me if I wanted her to call anybody. I said no. I said it fast, without thinking, and I have wondered about that ever since, because some part of me already knew and was protecting them from the question. I lay there making excuses. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe Mom did not want to drive at night. I had a whole defense built before I was fully awake, because protecting them was still my job even as I came out of anesthesia. Then I reached for my phone. And that is when I saw the photograph. Delaney had posted it that afternoon. It was taken on the deck of the beach house. My deck. 10 or 12 people in it, my mother in the middle with her hand on Delaney's belly, my father at the grill, everybody with a drink, the dunes going gold behind them the way they do at that hour. Under it, she had written, "Finally, one day that stayed peaceful." I looked at the timestamp. It was taken while I was still on the table. I want to tell you I cried. I did not. I did something I think is stranger. I zoomed in. on my mother's face, and then my father's, studying them like a document I had been told was a forgery. They looked fine, like people having a nice Saturday. Nobody looked distracted or afraid. They had taken the calls, and they had gone back to the grill. Later, my mother would insist the nurse had said I was stable. In her mind, stable meant she was no longer required. I put the phone face down on the blanket, and I lay there in the dark, and something went very quiet in me. Not loud, quiet, like a machine that had been running so long you stopped hearing it, shutting off. The nurse came back a while later to check on me, and she mentioned offhand while she was writing something down that my friend had been out in the waiting area for most of the afternoon and had only just left. I asked her which friend. She said the woman who had been there since around noon. Short hair. Kept coming to the desk to ask whether there was any update she was allowed to have. It was Marisol. Marisol runs second shift under me. We have worked together for 6 years. She had seen the surgery date up on the shift board, put in for a half day, and made the drive out here to sit in a waiting room for a woman she works with, because she thought somebody should be there. She sat there for hours. She never told me she was coming. She never told me she came. I found out from a nurse who assumed she was family. My parents both got calls from a hospital telling them their daughter was in trouble on an operating table, and they stayed at a barbecue. The woman who ran second shift under me took a half day off her own time. I have thought about that pairing more than almost anything else in my life. It did not make me angry that night. It made me tired in a way I did not know a person could be tired. I was in that hospital for 3 days, nobody came. My mother texted on the second day to ask how it went, and to remind me that the gender reveal was coming up and she hoped I would be up for it. I did not answer for a long time. Then I said I would be there. Because I still had not learned. Even then, lying in that bed with a drain in my back. Some part of me thought that if I showed up, if I was useful, if I helped set out the chairs, somebody might finally look at me. I got discharged with a lifting restriction, a bruise in the crook of my elbow, and a plastic band still around my wrist, which they cut off at the desk. I put it in my pocket without thinking about it. 10 days later, I drove out to the beach house to help get ready for the party. I let myself in with my key. The house smelled like my mother's cooking, and there were folding tables leaning against the wall in the hall, and Delaney's in-laws were already there, sitting in my living room with iced tea. My mother brought me over to introduce me. She put her hand on my arm, warm hostess voice on, and she introduced me to her daughter's in-laws as the one who helps them out around here. That is what she said. The one who helps out around here, in a house I own, in front of people who own their own homes and understand exactly what that sentence means. I stood there and I smiled and I said it was nice to meet them, and one of them asked if I lived nearby, and my mother answered for me. She said no, Sabine has a place in town, she just comes out and pitches in. I went into the kitchen and put my hands flat on the counter for a second. That is where my father found me, and he was in a good mood, and he told me, in exactly the tone he would use to ask me to pick up a bag of ice, that I should bring the deed paperwork out next weekend. I asked him what for, and he said, cheerfully, that they wanted to get Delaney's name on the property before the baby came. That it only made sense, that the house should be settled for the grandchild, so there would not be any confusion later on. Not a request, a logistics item. Bring the paperwork. Sabine, we are adding your sister to the house you bought. I did not argue with him in that kitchen. I said something non-committal about looking into it, and I went upstairs to put my bag in my room. And my room was empty. The bed was stripped. My dresser was gone. There were 3 cardboard boxes stacked against the wall with my things in them, my clothes folded on top of my books, and one of them had my name written on the side in marker in my mother's handwriting. The window over the dunes had a new blind on it. There were paint swatches taped to the wall in shades of pale yellow, and a crib still in its box leaning in the corner. They had cleared me out of my own house and nobody had mentioned it. I had slept in that room the weekend before surgery, it had still been mine then. Not one text. Not a question, not a single person saying, we are going to move your things, is that all right? They had come into that room, put my life in boxes, and started planning a nursery, and they had done it in the days I was in a hospital bed. I sat down on the floor next to those boxes, because my back would not let me do anything else, and I looked at the marker on the side of the box with my name on it, and I finally understood the arrangement I had been living in for 4 years. I was not a member of this family. I was infrastructure. They only noticed me when something stopped working. In a few weeks, 30 people were going to stand in my living room and celebrate a baby. In a house they were planning to sign over to somebody else, days after not one of them drove to a hospital. I did not decide anything on that floor. I was not sitting there plotting. I was mostly just doing the math on how long it would take me to get those boxes down the stairs with a lifting restriction. I gave it one more try. That is the part people skip when they tell this kind of story, so I am not going to skip it. I found my mother alone in the kitchen that evening, after the in-laws left, and I asked her to sit down with me. I told her I needed to talk about the house, and about the hospital. I got maybe 2 sentences out. I told her the surgery had gone badly and that I had woken up alone. And she put her hand up. She told me we were talking about the baby's future here, and that I should not drag my old issues into it. My old issues. Not even 2 weeks. That was the last time I ever tried. If your own mother has ever introduced you as the person who helps out, you already understand what changed in me that night. I drove home that night and I did not cry in the car, which I know is what you are supposed to do. I made a list instead. That is what I do. I have made lists under worse conditions than that. There had been an unsolicited offer on the house the previous autumn. A cash buyer. A couple relocating who had knocked on the door and then followed up through an agent after I said no. Coastal properties like that one get approached. I had turned them down without thinking twice, and I remember being a little proud of that at the time. The way you are proud of a thing you think proves something about you. I called that agent on Monday morning from my office at the distribution center, with the shift board on the wall behind me and my back still aching, and I asked whether the buyers were still interested. They were. The rest was paperwork. My attorney handled the sale, And because family members were living there without a lease, every notice period and legal step had to be followed. We followed all of them to the letter. Formal written notice went to that house. Certified. More than once. My parents did not open them. I knew exactly what happened to those envelopes. Anything official went into a basket on the hall table because, for 4 years, every bill, notice, and piece of property paperwork had been mine to handle. My mother saw certified mail and assumed Sabine would take care of it, because Sabine always did. For 4 years, I had corrected every one of their oversights before it cost them anything. This time, I let the notices speak for themselves. I stopped rescuing them from what they had chosen not to read. The closing date landed in the same week as the gender reveal. I did not arrange it. I simply did not call to warn anyone about a date already sitting in their hall basket, in writing, twice. There were about 30 people at that house on the Saturday. I almost did not go. I sat in my car at the end of the road for a while first, with the engine off, watching people carry coolers up the front steps. And then I went in because Delaney is my sister and it was her baby and I am not made of stone, whatever the rest of this sounds like. It was a good party, honestly. My mother had done a nice job. There were balloons on the deck rail and a table of food, and Delaney was glowing the way people do at those things. Her in-laws were there. Neighbors from up and down that stretch were there. They did the reveal in the yard. Pink. There was a lot of noise, and my mother cried, and I hugged my sister, and I meant it. A girl. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this child was going to grow up in a family that would find a use for her, and hoping she would turn out harder to use than I was. Then my mother got everyone's attention for a little speech. She stood on the deck of my house, with a glass in her hand, and she talked about how she could already picture her granddaughter running in this yard. How the little room upstairs at the back was already being painted for her. How this house had been in the family and was going to stay in the family for the generations coming. People raised their glasses, somebody said something sweet. And I stood at the edge of that deck with a plate in my hand and said absolutely nothing. And then Bernice from 3 houses down, who has known my parents for years and who has the kindest, loosest mouth on that entire road, came over to my mother with her glass and said what a shame it was that they were leaving, and asked where they were moving to. I watched my mother's face do nothing for a second. Then she laughed and said Bernice must have gotten the houses mixed up. And Bernice, being Bernice, said no, she was sure, because the young couple had been by twice now, and one of them had told her they were closing this month, and honestly she had been meaning to ask for weeks but did not want to pry. The deck got quiet in patches, not all at once, just the people close enough to hear. My mother turned and looked at me. She asked me, in front of everyone, what Bernice was talking about. I put my plate down on the rail, and I told her the truth, in a normal voice, without any performance in it, because I had been rehearsing nothing and I did not need to. I told her the house had been sold, that the contract was signed weeks ago, that closing was that week, that formal written notice had been sent to this address, certified more than once, and was almost certainly still sitting in the basket on the hall table. My father went inside. Actually went inside right then, in the middle of it, and came back out holding the basket and started going through it in front of everybody. You could see it on his face when he found them. 2 unopened certified envelopes. In his hand. In front of 30 people. My mother said the sentence that I think will follow her for the rest of her life. She asked me how I could throw them out of their own home, and I told her it stopped being their home the day they sold it to me. Nobody said anything. Somewhere behind me a cooler lid closed. Delaney came at me. Then she said I was taking a house away from a baby who was not even born yet, and that I had done it on purpose, today, to ruin this. I told her I had not taken one thing that belonged to her daughter. I told her they had promised that child something that belonged to me. And then I said the rest of it, and I said it quietly, which I think made it worse for them than shouting would have. I told that deck full of people that I bought this house 4 years ago, at a closing, with a lawyer, after the storm, when no buyer would offer enough to clear what my parents still owed on it, that I handed them every dollar I had saved in cash, and took the mortgage into my own name so they could walk away clean. that I had made every payment since, and paid the hurricane insurance and the taxes, and put the roof on and rewired it, and been up a ladder in a respirator on my own vacation days while my mother took a photo because she thought it was funny. That they had lived here for free ever since, and I never once asked for $1. That they rented my house out every summer and kept the money, and I let them. And that a few weeks before this party, I had a surgery that everybody in my family knew the date of, that went wrong, and the hospital called both my parents, and both of them answered the phone, and neither of them came. That I woke up alone in a room with the lights going orange. That I was in that building for 3 days and nobody in my family walked through the door. That the only person who sat in that waiting room was a woman I work with, who took a half day off her own time and never even told me she had done it. And that while I was on the table, somebody standing on this deck posted a photograph about how peaceful the day was. There was a silence after that, which I do not think I will ever forget. About 30 people, on a wooden deck, over the sound of the water. Delaney's mother-in-law broke it. She had been standing near the door the whole time, with her arms folded, and she said it to the whole yard. Not to me. All of you knew she was in surgery, and not one of you went? Nobody answered her. My mother opened her mouth and closed it. My father was still holding the basket. That was the moment it turned. Not my speech, her question. I left about 10 minutes later. I did not storm out. I said goodbye to 2 people, got into my car, and made it about a mile down the road before I had to pull into a boat ramp lot because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. I sat there for a long time. That was where I finally cried, if you were wondering, and it was not the good kind. It felt like a bill coming due for something I had been paying on for a very long time without ever knowing what I was buying. The sale closed that week. The buyers allowed a short post-closing occupancy period, and my parents used every day of it. After that, they went back to Delaney's house, the same place they had stayed every summer while renting out mine, until they found a 2-bedroom apartment inland. Their savings and Social Security would not carry anything larger. They lost the summer income too, obviously. That was the part that actually hurt them, I think. 6 weeks of peak season money. Gone, along with a property that had never been theirs. They told a story afterward. Of course they did. They said I had tricked them out of the family home, that I had waited for the right moment to pounce, and that I had always been the cold one. The problem was the witnesses. 30 people were on that deck. They heard Bernice. They watched my father hold up 2 unopened certified letters. They heard Delaney's mother-in-law ask why nobody had gone to the hospital, and they heard that nobody answered her. Their story never gained any traction because everyone who might have repeated it had been standing right there. Delaney's in-laws never looked at my family the same way again. I did not ask them to take sides. They had simply seen enough to draw their own conclusions. Delaney and I are not in contact. Her daughter is a year old now. I send something at Christmas. I do not know whether it gets opened. I hope she grows up knowing that being useful and being loved are 2 very different arrangements. About a year after all of this, my mother called me. I let the phone ring twice before I answered. Hearing her voice again felt strange, though not as strange as I had expected. She asked how I was doing. She asked whether my back still bothered me, and whether I was still working the same long hours. They were ordinary questions, but I could not remember the last time she had called without needing something from me. We talked for a while. She told me a little about my father, then asked about my job. For a few minutes, it almost felt like a normal conversation between a mother and her daughter. But she never mentioned the hospital. She never apologized. I did not push her to talk about it. I had already spent too much of my life trying to make people say the things they should have said on their own. Before we hung up, she said it was good to hear my voice. I told her it was good to hear hers too. And I meant it. But when the call ended, I did not take one pleasant conversation as a sign that everything had been fixed. I still cared about her. But that did not mean things could go back to the way they were. I still have the hospital band. The plastic one they cut off my wrist at the discharge desk. It went into my pocket that day and then into a drawer in my kitchen, and it is still there, under the batteries and the spare keys. I rarely look at it now. But for a while after all this, it was evidence. It was the thing I would reach for whenever I started to feel guilty. whenever I wondered whether I had been too hard on two people their age in a two-bedroom apartment with stairs. I would open that drawer, look at the band, and remember waking up in an orange-lit room with nobody in it. It would put the steel back in me. I do not need it for that anymore. It has stopped being an argument. Now it is just a small piece of plastic in a drawer that reminds me of the day I found out what I actually was to them, which turned out to be the same day I stopped being it. The people who show up are the people who show up. It is not complicated, and it is not about blood. A woman I have worked beside for 6 years sat in that waiting room. My mother was 40 minutes away with the phone in her hand. If you have ever been the one everybody calls, and you are starting to wonder whether anybody would call you, think about who was actually in the room the last time you needed somebody. Tell me who it was in the comments. I read them, and if you know that feeling, stay close by. I tell stories here about the ones who finally stopped being useful and started being free. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe. Take care of yourselves.